Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Carrie Jones, and today's webinar will be about reducing estrogen risk, the basics of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 estrogen detoxification. Estrogen detoxification is a hot topic, and it is something that I want everyone to understand how it properly works, because I often find that people mistake phase 1 for phase 3 or phase 2 for phase 1, and then the patient may feel better initially, and in the end, they feel worse. We're also trying to mitigate risks here with estrogen detoxification, and so in the course of the next 45 minutes, I'm going to help make you a much better educator on this topic. So let's dive right in. I am the medical director for Precision Analytical, who is the creator of the Dutch test. Let's set the scene. You make or take an estrogen, and this does apply for both men and women. Obviously, men are likely not taking estrogen, but men make estrogen as well. So male or female, you make or take an estrogen, you use that estrogen, you're done with that estrogen. Where does that estrogen go? So with estrogen detoxification, we're going to talk about how it goes through the liver and other extrahepatic tissues, such as the breast. So phase 1 detoxification is called hydroxylation. That's when it divides up into 2, 4, or 16 hydroxy. Phase 2 detoxification is where it goes through methylation and utilizes the enzyme COMT. Phase 3 detoxification is where we go through the GI tract through glucuronidation. This is where we look into the estrobolome. And the estrobolome, the word, is probably my most favorite word in medicine right now because it's just fun to say. But since hormones is my area, I love how we can work with the estrobolome to really help impact estrogen in the body. So let's start at the top. Let's start at phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. We want to understand this because we want to understand estrogen dominance in men and women. Women come in with heavy periods, with PMS, with tender breasts, with breast cancer, or an increased risk for breast cancer. Men come in with growing bellies, erectile dysfunction, low energy, low mood. They're thinking it's testosterone, quite possible it's estrogen. And we want to reduce the risk in both genders. So this is my estrogen metabolism chart. And as you can see very quickly, I drew this. This is as good as it gets when it comes to graphic design for me. But I want to make it really simple for you to understand how estrogen detoxification works. Basically, what you're going to do is follow the color-coded green to the smiley faces. You don't want to follow the red to the frowny face. So in the upper left-hand corner, you will see your two main estrogens, E1 and E2. They do convert back and forth into each other. And then on the far left, if you look under estrone, that goes down 3 pathways. The green pathway is your 2-hydroxy. Your red pathway is your 4-hydroxy. And your blue pathway, which is not, it can be good and it can be bad, which is why it's blue and not red. That's your 16 pathway. Now, if you go down your green pathway to your 2-hydroxy, you have 2 choices. You can become something known as a stable adduct, which we will talk about, or you can become neutralized through the COMT enzyme to become a methoxy, and then that is excreted through phase 3, smiley face. If you go down the red pathway, 4OH, you have 2 options as well. You can continue on through the green pathway, COMT, become a methoxy, and get excreted in a healthy manner through phase 3, smiley face. But if you turn tail and you continue down the red pathway, it's known as the quinone pathway with a Q. And you'll see it says quinone form, and it goes on to say depurinating adduct on DNA, and then increased mutation cancer risk, frowny face. You do not want to head down this pathway. And don't worry, we are going to talk a little bit about each of these pathways. Now, your body is intelligent, and it has put 2 stopgaps along the way. You'll see them in the stars. The first one is quinone reductase. For those of you who are into genomics, that's NQO1. And you'll see GST, which is glutathione sulfur transferase. And they're in the green. So if you can upregulate those enzymes, then you will go back to the beginning, to the 4OH, and hopefully can push the 4OH down to the green. Or you can go out through the glutathione pathway and get properly excreted. So when you're looking at this chart, your whole goal, like I said, is to follow the smiley faces and avoid the frowny faces when it comes to symptom management and risk. Your goal with phase 1 and phase 2 is to get to phase 2. That's known as the methoxy state. But we're going to start with how you could potentially have cancer. How could these estrogen metabolites potentially cause breast cancer? So if you think back to that red pathway, what happens as your estrogen, as it's going down the quinone pathway, becomes what's known as a depurinating adduct. And a depurinating adduct is the problem. That is what causes DNA damage. So if we go back, you can see where the big red arrow is that tell you along the pathway where a depurinating adduct is and the increased risk for cancer mutation. When it comes to adducts, you have two forms. You have the stable adduct. These remain in DNA unless they're removed by your repair mechanism. They're much more ideal. They don't cause holes in your DNA and less risk for mutation. Think of it this way. Think of a child who's very, very obedient. So you tell the child, I want you to sit on this couch and don't move until I tell you to. And you leave and you're elsewhere in the house and you're doing stuff. And when you come back to the house, the child is still sitting quietly on the couch, not doing anything. And you go, okay, you can get off the couch. Time to go. Grab your jacket. Let's run errands. The child gets up, grabs his jacket, and goes with you. That's a stable adduct. A stable adduct remains in the DNA until the repair system comes through and says, oh, we need to move you, and gives it direction on how to repair it. Much more ideal. Now, of course, your repair system can still mess up. So it's not no risk for mutation, it's just less risk for mutation. However, a depurinating or an unstable adduct breaks off from the DNA and leaves the DNA with an apurinic site. What happens is you now have holes in your DNA and your repair system goes, oh my gosh, I have holes in my DNA, and it has to repair it. A few holes is not a problem. A lot of holes can lead to increased risk for mutation. Again, go back to my child analogy. Now you have a very disobedient child who you say, hey child, can you please sit on this couch and not move? And when you go upstairs, come back downstairs in 10 minutes, your entire family room has been destroyed. All the toys have been pulled out. All the books have been pulled out. They've built a pillow fort on the couch. Everything's been torn apart. That is a depurinating or unstable adduct. Now you have to go around and quickly clean up your family room. And sometimes you clean it up really well. And sometimes you don't have time to clean it up that well. And so you're just throwing, toys and books and stuff into baskets off into the corner. And it's not as great as it could be. Same thing happens in the DNA. The more holes you have, the more risk for mutation you have because your repair mechanism may not do it correctly. So your goal, if you're going to have an adduct, is to have a stable adduct, not an unstable or depurinating adduct. Researchers look at adducts when it comes to cancer. So in this example, this is by Doctors Rogan and Cavalieri. There were 40 healthy women, 40 women at high risk for breast cancer, and 40 women who actually have breast cancer. And this is their adduct level. Now, as humans, we always have cancer in our body to some degree, right? And so adducts, we will always have adducts in our body to some degree, and it's up to our body to fix them. So in the healthy women, and you'll see it's kind of a turquoise color or a greenish color, you can see that those adducts are quite a bit lower, more white space compared to the other two. Women at high risk, which is the navy blue color or purplish color, I guess it's more blue, isn't it? Blue color, it looks very similar to the purple color with women with breast cancer. But if you look really closely, the women at high risk, they don't have as many adducts. There are less high-level bars compared to the purple, the women with breast cancer. But it's very close and very concerning. And clearly, women with high risk and women with actual breast cancer are much higher than healthy women who have much lower levels of adducts. This is my analogy. It's always my analogy when it comes to phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 estrogen detoxification. Phase 1 is a bathtub. It's the water filling up your bathtub. Is the right type of water filling up your bathtub, and how fast or how slow is the water filling it up? Think of your 2, your 4, and your 16 pathway that I talked about. Is it 2 water that's coming into your bathtub? Is it 4 water? Is it 16 water? Is the 4 water coming in slow, or is the 4 water coming in fast? Phase 2 detoxification is the ability of your drain of your bathtub. Is your drain open? Is your drain closed? Is your drain open, but it's not open wide enough for the amount of water that's coming in, and therefore the bathtub still overflows? Phase 3 is the sewer line that takes your bath water out of your house. This happens in your intestines, right? So if your sewer line is backed up, so if you're having intestinal dysfunction, you're going to have a backup in your whole system, and it's going to affect your estrogen detoxification. So we learn it, you're going to learn it today as phase 1, 2, and 3, but you're going to address it as phase 3, 2, and 1. If you don't address the sewer line, you only address the bathtub, you can still have problems because you have a blocked sewer line. You can have the healthiest water in the world coming into your bathtub, but if your sewer line is clogged, you're still going to have a bathtub that overflows. So we have to be very careful about this. So how do you evaluate phases 1 and phase 2? As I said earlier, I am the medical director for Precision Analytical, creators of the Dutch test, which is a dried urine hormone test. But my point is phase 1 and phase 2 are evaluated in urine. Some of you might be doing dried urine. Some of you might be doing 24-hour urine, but it is done in urine. It's not done in stool. It is not done in saliva, and is not done in blood. So keep that in mind when you're doing phase 1 and phase 2. This is different from phase 3, which is done in stool testing, but we'll get to that in a couple slides. So phase 1 detoxification of estrogen. We're at the top, water coming into the bathtub. Let's really focus on the bathtub. Now remember, you're going to treat it in the reverse order, but you have to understand it as it moves through the arrows in this order. How do you evaluate phase 1? So when you're evaluating phase 1, we look at your main estrogens, E1 and E2, and then we look to see your 2, your 4, and your 16 pathways. Again, your 2 has the sort of kind of smiling face. Your 4 has the frowny face, or excuse me, may back up. Your 2 has the smiley face, your 4 has the frowny face, and your 16 has the sort of smiling face, depending what pathways they go down. But this is phase 1, your 2, your 4, and your 16. So on urine testing, you're going to look for this. When we do phase 1 detoxification, we're looking at your CYP or CYP family. So CYP 1A1 and 1A2 direct your 2. So you want to upregulate those enzymes. CYP 1B1 upregulates 4. And 3A4, now 3A4 is a huge mover. It is an enzyme that moves a lot in your body. So many chemicals, so many medications, so many things. But when it comes to estrogen, it does increase 16-OH. I will often get asked, Carrie, what can I do to speed up or slow down 3A4? I'm like, be very careful. I know we're talking about it in the context of estrogen, but it is one of your biggest movers in your body when it comes to your phase 1 enzymes. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now let's look at an example. This is a real example. Estrogen dominance. So their E1 and their E2 are elevated. Try that circled. I don't have that circled. Your E1 in this example, the E1 and the E2 are elevated, so they clearly have a lot of estrogen going on. And if we drop down and we look at the first dial, which is 2OH, it says sluggish clearance. Now, the way that you read these dials is like a gas gauge. In between the stars is the normal range. And then, of course, the dials are colored. So you have green and you have red. And red is either too high or it's too low. So in this case, the 2OH is in between the stars. So yes, it is in range, but it's not fast enough to keep up with the E1 and E2, right? So the amount of water that's coming into the bathtub is not as much 2 as I would want. I would want it to be much more 2. Underneath that is your 4 dial, which is really high at 2.5. Hence the reason I have the word whoa next to it. So this tells me that the water you have coming into your bathtub is all 4 water. And then below that is your 16, and your 16 is right at the upper end. It's at 2.3, and 2.6 is the cutoff. So in this case, they have way too much 4, and probably way too much 16, and not enough 2. So right off the bat, I can tell them that they are at a higher risk for estrogen-related cancers, especially if this is a female, which it is, then they're at a higher risk for estrogen-related breast cancer or estrogen-related cancers if we don't do anything about it. In this example, this is done 2 weeks apart. This woman was given DIM, diindolylmethane. After 2 weeks, you can see all of the dials changed. In 2 weeks, her E1 and her E2 dropped down into the healthy green range. Her 2OH got higher. It increased from 6.4 to 9.4. Her 4-OH dropped from 2.5 to 1.5, hence the smiley face, much better. And her 16 dropped from 23, oh, you know what? It says 1.4. Oh, excuse me, 2.3 to 1.4. Yes, 2.3 to 1.4. So it has dropped. And again, smiley face, much better. So just 2 weeks of diindolylmethane helped course correct her phase 1 detoxification. So we have there and we have there. So let's talk about diindolylmethane. Some of you are using indol 3-carbinol or I3C. Now, how are they different? How do they work specifically? So diindolylmethane, DIM, and indol 3-carbinol, I3C, are specifically phase 1 metabolism movers. So indol 3-carbinol needs healthy stomach acid to break apart and convert into all these compounds. The predominant is DIM, but according to research, 10 to 60% of indol 3-carbinol converts into DIM. And I don't know if you're a 10% person or a 60% person, which if you need to move a lot of estrogen, then I'm going to want you with the 60%. But what happens if you don't have very healthy stomach acid and you're down at like the 10%? That's not going to help move the needle very much. DIM is what's known as an acid-catalyzed dimer of I3C. Makes sense. It breaks apart, or it's created from I3C breaking apart in acid. As you know, DIM is increased in the brassica family because that's where it comes from. If you chop the food or mildly heat it, like mildly steam it, mildly saute it, DIM is in and out of the body in about 24 hours. It moves quick. So either you get it from food or supplementation. It doesn't hang out, for days and weeks. So if you're working with somebody on DIM, they will have to take it daily to have the effect. How does DIM work? It increases the conversion of E1 and E2 into the 2-OH via your CYP1A enzymes. Specifically what it does is it binds to the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, the AHR, and that induces or turns on, speeds up your CYP1A enzyme. So that's good. It directs everything to your 2. It also increases NRF2. Now, NRF2 is big on increasing your phase 2 enzymes. Now, I will say, given the amount of hormone results that I've seen over the years, which are thousands and thousands, DIM alone will not move, that I've seen, the phase 2 dials, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. So while DIM can be helpful for increasing NRF2, there are other compounds out there that are much stronger, such as sulforaphane. Sulforaphane also comes from the brassica family, specifically broccoli sprouts. Not broccoli, not full-grown broccoli, but the sprouts of broccoli sprouts. So sulforaphane is actually a much, much, much more potent NRF2 mover than DIM, but you will read in the research that DIM can help increase NRF2. What I use DIM for is exactly what it does. Increases that aryl hydrocarbon receptor, increases the CYP1A, either 1A1 or 1A2, and that will help push everything to the less carcinogenic 2 side. The dosage in research is 100 to 300 milligrams a day. I know definitely a lot of clinicians who will do 50 to 500. It's a pretty wide range when it comes to DIM, but I'm just letting you know what's in research, 100 to 300. Please keep in mind, though, DIM is not like a magic pill when it comes to estrogen. And the 2-OH is not healthy per se, it's just less carcinogenic. Remember, it causes stable adducts. The child sitting on the couch who's obedient can still make a small mess, right? They may not make as much of a mess as the disobedient child, but they can still make a small mess. Just like a stable adduct can still be mutated by the repair mechanism if the repair mechanism gets it wrong. So you have to be careful that thinking 2-OH is just, all healthy all the time. The goal, of course, is to make methoxy. You want to move from your phase 1 to your phase 2 and get that methoxy as quickly as possible. But more importantly, you want to remember that you treat 3-2-1. So I will often hear clinicians put everybody on DIM, diindolylmethane, and initially your patient may get better and then they may feel worse. They can have worse estrogen dominant symptoms because you didn't unblock the sewer line or you didn't address the drain, or they feel worse because now you've depleted them of estrogen. Anecdotally, all the time, we see DIM lower E1 and E2 out of circulation. So please be very, very careful if you have a menopausal woman or a very low estrogen woman, that if you put her on DIM, you're going to lower her estrogen in circulation even more. And what I will see the mistake that clinicians can make sometimes is they will put a woman on DIM, and she will call the office and she will say, I now have hot flashes and night sweats, or I have vaginal dryness. What is going on? It's too much DIM. Switch, don't use DIM, move on to a different phase. Also, please remember that the CYP1A1 and 1A2 are not only for estrogen. So if you do upregulate it with DIM, you have to be careful because it's not, nothing's in a silo. Nothing in your body is in a silo. It is very specific. This pathway is very specific for polyaromatic hydrocarbon metabolism. So while you may think, right, oh, DIM is going to help me detoxify my polyaromatic hydrocarbons, if you don't clean up the drain and you don't clean up the sewer line, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons that have gone through phase 1 detox are much more toxic to you than they were when they originally came into the body. So you want to make sure everybody moves on to phase 2 and then to phase 3 quickly. So just be aware of that. The DIM is wonderful, but it's not 100% safe in all cases. We have to be careful. I often am asked, can I just eat the brassica family? Carrie, I have a plant-based diet. I'm just going to eat brassica. I'm going to eat broccoli and cauliflower every day. How much can I eat to make that happen? So I found the research on it. In this research, and I have it quoted here, they say it is suggested that intake would be needed of upwards of 600 grams a day and sustained for several years to achieve an anti-cancer benefit. So if you quick do the math, 600 grams a day is 2.5 cups of brassica family a day, which many of you would probably think to yourself, well, yeah, I eat about 2.5 cups of vegetables a day. Just remember, it's sustained for several years to have the anti-cancer effect. What if you need the anti-cancer effect today? What if you got a diagnosis or your patient has a diagnosis of cancer today? Are you going to tell them to eat 2.5 cups of brassica family and that's it, and sustain it for several years and then they'll get the anti-cancer effect? Probably not. You will absolutely tell them to eat brassica family for sure, but you're going to give them additional support to help their estrogen clear out of their body so they have the effect today as opposed to several years from now. All right, what else helps reduce risks and symptoms? Let's take a quick look at quinone reductase and GST, because again, these are your stop gaps in your when you're headed towards the frowny face pathway. Let's look at N-acetylcysteine. N-acetylcysteine has a lot of research behind it when it comes to improving or reducing estrogen-related symptoms and risks. So it prevents damage to DNA by inhibiting the formation of catechol-quinone, so again, the quinone pathway, or reacting with them. So it reduces the semiquinone back to the 4-OH. So as you're headed along the red pathway to the quinone pathway, the N-acetylcysteine can go and push it back to the beginning, back to the 4-OH, and hopefully then you've upregulated COMT and you're continuing along the green pathway. N-acetylcysteine also inhibits adduct formation by 60% or more by reacting with the quinone itself directly and then excreting it in vitro studies. Of course, as we know, the hydrolysis of N-acetylcysteine in the liver and the gut makes glutathione. So many people are taking glutathione, many people are taking N-acetylcysteine, and many people are taking both. Now, the dose for N-acetylcysteine is 250 to 1,200 milligrams a day. The research and studies is not as high as we thought. Typically, what I hear from colleagues is 1,200 milligrams a day is a standard NAC dose. But when I'm reading the research, actually, I had an opportunity to spend a couple hours with Dr. Eleanor Rogan, who is the leading researcher when it comes to adducts and estrogen, and she said the dose of N-acetylcysteine is much, much lower, 250 to 500, somewhere in there when it comes to protection. So if you're using N-acetylcysteine for other things, as we know, it does lots of things in the body. You may use a higher dose, but if you're using it for estrogen-related issues, keep in mind that you may not have to use as much as you think, according to Dr. Rogan, which is wonderful. I am asked often, should I take glutathione or N-acetylcysteine? I did have the opportunity to ask Dr. Rogan that, and she stated that she had not looked into glutathione by itself. She only does her research with N-acetylcysteine, so she did not know the answer to that. But when it comes to glutathione, please remember that you do have to be able to recycle it, and you have to have the cofactors with it. And so if you take glutathione and you can't recycle it because you're anemic or because you're missing selenium, you're depleted in selenium or something like that, then you're not going to be able to optimize your glutathione pathways as much as you think. So I used to take glutathione itself all the time. And personally, I've actually switched to N-acetylcysteine because of what I've learned. Again, I'm not saying glutathione is bad at all. I think it's wonderful. Just keep in mind what it takes to keep glutathione going round and round, and be mindful of that. And the citations for all of that. All right, let's look at phase 2 detoxification of estrogen. So now we're at the drain. Is your drain open or closed? If it's open, is it open wide enough? So if we're looking at estrogen dominant symptoms again, keep in mind that we're going from the 2 or the 4 pathway through COMT. You're utilizing COMT over to the methoxy. So we want to get methylated with to methoxy. And in this example, this test example, they actually tell you the methylation activity. So it's a OH, a hydroxy to methoxy ratio, and it's low. This tells me the drain in this person is closed or not as open as it should be. So while yes, the methoxy is in between the stars, which is in range, it's not open wide enough. Look at that hydroxy on the left-hand side. It's 6.0. That means a lot of water is coming into the bathtub, and the drain is open, but not open wide enough. And as a result, the water is still overflowing onto the floor. We don't want that. I get asked often, does this have anything to do with MTHFR? This person's results, their SNP results are right below it. This is the same person. And you can see their COMT, both their 2 out of 3 COMTs are ++, which is the slow. They have a very slow COMT enzyme, which means it's 3 to 4 decreased COMT activity. And COMT is what moves this along. This person does not have an MTHFR problem. Now, does MTHFR play into methylation? Yes, but COMT is the biggest player for sure. When it comes to COMT, when we're looking at this research, if you read the very bottom, it says the COMT inhibitor, so they gave an inhibitor, blocked the methoxylation of the estrogens with concomitant 3 to 4 increase in the depurinating adducts. Those are the unstable adducts. Low activity of COMT leads to higher level of depurinating adduct or estrogen DNA adducts that can induce mutations and initiate cancer. So in this case, they gave a COMT inhibitor and found, oops, that really increases the risk for cancer mutation. We don't want this. We want to support our COMT. And even in the case of this person who has ++, we can do things to help, such as magnesium and CME. Magnesium and CME are the 2 main coenzymes for COMT. When you go back and look at your methionine cycle, I don't think I have it in these slides, but if you just Google methionine cycle, and you will see homocysteine moving to methionine and back around again, all of the cofactors go into making COMT. So trimethylglycine, dimethylglycine, both of them, TMG, DMG, methionine itself, you can take as a supplement, choline, the methylated B vitamins, such as methyl B12, methylfolate, zinc, just a few. So if you just study the methionine cycle, you'll see that all of these coenzymes help make the methionine cycle go round and round, of which one of the outcomes is to make your methyl enzymes such as COMT. How many Americans and Canadians, and actually first world country people, are magnesium deficient? So many, and we know this, and so it's entirely possible. Just by helping support their magnesium intake, it will help support their phase 2 detoxification. And there are the citations for that. Why is phase 2 detoxification important? Why do I keep harping on this over and over and over again? Because your phase 1 metabolites are actually reactive oxygen species. They're actually more harmful than the estrone and the estradiol itself. So we need to neutralize them as fast as possible. We don't want them hanging out as phase 1 metabolites. When you become a methoxy, you are water soluble and you're ready to be excreted, which is what we want. This is our goal. So focus on that phase 2. Get your drain open. But now that your drain is open, we have to move through phase 3, detoxification of estrogen. This is the sewer line. We have to evaluate how your sewer line is doing. So how do you evaluate phase 3? Well, we move from urine testing to stool testing. We need to find out how estrogen is being excreted out of the stool. There's this thing called the estrobolome that I alluded to in the beginning, and I said it was my favorite word when it comes in my favorite medical word because it's so fun to say. But what they found is that the estrobolome is an aggregate of enteric bacterial genes whose products are capable of metabolizing estrogens. It's basically the part of your microbiome that handles estrogen, hence the reason they call it estrobolome. By modulating the enterohepatic circulations of estrogens, the estrobolome affects both the excretion and circulation of estrogens. In turn, the composition of the estrobolome can be shaped by factors such as antibiotics, other drugs, and diet that modulate its functional activity. This makes sense, right? It's part of the microbiome. So let's dive into this more. How do they figure out the estrobolome? Well, it turns out this study was done back in 2016. So some very brave women took radioactively labeled estradiol, estrone, and estriol and swallowed it, or excuse me, injected it, and they found, and then they collected their stool at the other end. So they got radioactively labeled estrone, estradiol, estriol, and then collected their stool at the other end, and they searched for the estradiol, estrone, and estriol. And what they found was that only 10 to 15% came out. And they were like, well, where did the rest go? Why didn't it all come out? Why was it not a higher percent? And what they realized with this enzyme called beta-glucuronidase in the gut is causing the reabsorption back into circulation. And they found that by modulating beta-glucuronidase, we can modulate how much estrogen is back in absorption versus gets excreted out of the intestines. Now, I'm often asked, is beta-glucuronidase all bad? No, absolutely not. Just like anything, it's Goldilocks. Too much or too little can be a problem. It does help break down large carbohydrates. It does help break down things like flavonoids, and it assists with bilirubin reabsorption. So it is quite important in the body. But too much of a good thing is not a good thing. What does beta-glucuronidase do to estrogen? So it deconjugates things. Here's my analogy. When your body is done with estrogen and you go through phase 1 and you go through phase 2, you are essentially, basically, in a box with a lid on it, with a bow tied on. This is called glucuronidation. And you are to be excreted out of the body. Beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that comes over and cleaves that off. It unties the bow, opens the lid, and allows estrogen to escape as a free form, and that gets reabsorbed. So estradiol or estrone that you have tagged to go actually gets reabsorbed. So what do you do to create a healthy estrobolome? Well, first and foremost, you test, because I need to know, how is your sewer line doing? What's the microbiome doing? And it's affected by things like parasites and inflammation and candida. I want to know the levels of your beta-glucuronidase, and you can do all of that through stool testing. And of course, like I said, you start there. We start with the sewer. Once you know the results, what are you going to do? Or while you're waiting for the results even, you're going to focus on diet. This is about the coolest thing to me. It's now understood that diet plays a significant role in shaping the microbiome, with experiments showing that dietary alterations can induce large temporary microbial shifts within 24 hours. What did you eat today is going to change your microbiome in the next 24 hours. So if you're thinking to yourself, I did not eat very healthy today. I totally cheated today. I, ate something that I normally don't eat. I really enjoyed myself with what I ate today. Know that your microbiome is shifting in 24 hours. Now, if you don't normally eat that way and you go back to your typical, whatever, healthy diet, know that your microbiome can shift back in 24 hours. But if you're routinely eating foods that will affect your microbiome in a negative way, then routinely, 24 hours on top of each other, 24, 24, 24, you're going to have a dysfunctional microbiome. So number 2, reduce antibiotics and toxin exposure. This is so prevalent, of course, and I'm not saying no antibiotics, but there's a time and a place for everything. But if you know that an antibiotic is probably not going to work, if you know it's something like a virus, if you know that it's something, that it's not as bad as the person thinks, they're asking for antibiotics just because out of habit, right? It's a safety net for them. And you're like, no, let's preserve your microbiome. Really try to educate them. The use of antibiotic reduces the capacity of intestinal microflora to metabolize phytochemicals into compounds that may protect us against cancer. However, antibiotic use also disrupts the intestinal microflora metabolism of estrogens. So I have actually asked patients who've had to go on antibiotics about their next menstrual cycle or two. And inevitably, they will tell me, my PMS was terrible. My periods were heavier. My breasts were more tender. I was more moody. Is that because I was sick? And I will say it's definitely possible because you were sick. Infection has a huge impact on how your hormones work in the body. But if you also had to do an antibiotic for whatever reason, then that antibiotic is going to affect your gut and it's going to affect the metabolism of your estrogens. And it's entirely possible you absorbed a lot of estrogen and therefore your next cycle was miserable. So you're going to have to do some microbiome cleanup to really help that. Now, when it comes to toxicant exposure, this is just a very, very, very small snippet of what toxicants do to the microbiome and to estrogen. I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge at this point that toxicant exposure can affect the way we detoxify and therefore can affect the way our estrogen circulates in our body and affects our microbiome. And of course, there's thousands of studies, and this is just a very small snippet. Number 3, look at prebiotics and resistant starch. So this article was looking at examples like artichoke, dandelion greens, jicama, chicory root, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, pectin, and the effect on the microbiome, and it found it to be rather positive. So encouraging these things when it comes to diet and lifestyle with patients can be really helpful at addressing their gut, which is fantastic. Then the second part of the article looked at probiotics and fermented foods, and they found probiotics as opposed to prebiotics were also quite helpful as well. And I don't think I have it listed on here, but I do want to go back on the prebiotics and resistant starch, but just to give a shout out to carrots. So if you have organic carrots, don't peel them, like full carrots, not like the baby carrots that have all been, I don't even know what the word to use for baby carrots. Well, you know how baby carrots are processed. So a real carrot, organic, don't peel it, just wash it. But the outside part of the carrot is actually really quite helpful. It has an undigestible fiber in it that is really good for the microbiome and subsequently really good for estrogen. So I tell women, include carrots, be like a bunny and chew on cleaned organic carrots that aren't peeled, and that can also help your estrogen. And I can't believe I didn't include that in my slides because I like to give a shout out to carrots. All right, supplementation. What can I do for supplementation? Well, one of the big ones is, of course, calcium D-glucarate. Calcium D-glucarate is also known as CDG. It is a beta-glucuronidase inhibitor. It will not lower the levels of beta-glucuronidase. That's not what it does. You have to address the microbiome to lower the levels of the beta-glucuronidase. But what it does is it inhibits its action. It's also known as a variety of things, calcium glucarate, saccharic acid, calcium disaccharate, glucaric acid. And by, I have had questions before like, oh, saccharin? Like, no, saccharin and calcium D-glucarate are different, very, very different. So please don't confuse it with that. Don't confuse it with glutamine and don't confuse it with calcium by itself. Very different. So the mechanism of action is that it keeps the glucuronide group on the estrogen. Basically what it does is it keeps the lid and the bow on the box so it can be properly excreted and the estrogen not be reabsorbed. Like I said, it does not lower the levels of beta-glucuronidase in the gut. You still have to do that. You still have to work with the microbiome. According to research, dosing is very high, 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams a day at a minimum. What they found in animal studies is that the animals run much higher doses based on milligrams per kilogram of body weight. However, calcium D-glucarate is expensive. It's definitely an expensive supplement. And we have found that every little bit helps. So 500 milligrams is still helpful. So what I tell people is if you have somebody that needs to move their calcium cancer risk, let's say, now, then do the high dose of calcium D-glucarate. Put them on 1,500 to 3,000. And if you have somebody who you're working on their microbiome, estrogen detoxification is a problem. Their estrogen symptoms, they have PMS, they have heavy periods, they have endometriosis, they have tender breasts, or it's a guy, it's a male who has elevated estrogens and in GI issues as well, that you can do 500 milligrams while you're working on everything else. It is still helpful. But if you need the most bang for your buck, you're going to have to pay some bucks. You're going to have to use the most amount of calcium D-glucarate. There are foods high in calcium D-glucarate, oranges, carrots, apples, grapefruit, and the cruciferous vegetables. They are nowhere near therapeutic doses. So I still tell people to eat these foods. Carrots I gave a shout out to. We've already talked about cruciferous vegetables or brassica family. But don't think you can just eat your way in oranges and you will get the same estrogen relief as by taking the supplement. And I just want to make one last plug. You still have to address the microbiome because the calcium D-glucarate does not address the microbiome. All right, so let's summarize everything you have just learned. You've learned it as phase 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 happens primarily in the liver. Phase 1 can happen in extrahepatic tissues as well, but we focus primarily in the liver. Phase 3 happens in the intestines, but you're going to address it as 3, 2, 1 because now you know you have to unplug the sewer line, then you have to open the drain, and then you have to affect the water. Sometimes you have to do all of them all at once. Sometimes you have to do 1 and 2 at the same time, 1 and 3 at the same time, 2 and 3 at the same time. Absolutely fine. Sometimes you only need to do one of them. Sometimes it's just the sewer line, and sometimes it's just the water. So you're just giving them dim. But if you don't test, you don't know, and you may end up making it worse. So you got to be careful. The creation of the unstable or the depurinating adducts is the real problem when it comes to mutation problem. So we want to reduce the amount of depurinating adducts in the body. And if you don't test estrogen metabolism through urine testing, such as Dutch testing or GI testing, then you won't know where the problem lies. And I'm often asked, what symptoms should I look for to know which phase of detoxification it is? I'm like, it's all the same symptoms. Yes, if you have phase 3 problems, they probably have GI intestinal issues for sure. But they're going to report, as an example, PMS, heavy periods, mood changes, regardless if it's phase 1, 2, 3, or all of the above. So there really isn't a keynote symptom that I hear where I can say, oh, that keynote tells me it's phase 2. You're going to have to test to find out. You might actually have to do extra testing and look at COMT. QR is quinone reductase, which actually is NQO1, so I apologize for that. I was just trying to make it easy, but when you're actually doing SNP testing, you'll be looking for NQO1 and GST, glutathione sulfur transferase, to help with proper excretion. We know an unbalanced microbiome will raise hormone levels, and in the end, ultimately, you are what you eat, you are what you absorb, you are what your microbiome does with you. So please eat for your liver and eat for your microbiome to help your estrogen detoxification. So that concludes our talk. I hope you now feel like you are better experts at understanding estrogen detoxification, both for yourself and for your patients and clients, so that you can really help address their high estrogen symptoms, whether they're male or female, and mitigate any risks, future risks that they might have, or even for the patient who is currently battling estrogen cancer, estrogen-related cancers at this time. So I am Dr. Carrie Jones. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really excited for the IFS Symposium, where I'll be speaking about libido and more about hormones. So if you're listening to this, definitely sign up, and I will see you there in Vancouver in 2020.